Hello everybody, it's me, the Politicrat, and today we will be doing a short video where I'll be taking the Fascism test. I don't know if anybody's ever taken it before, but it measures from questions you answer, the questions that it asks, how much of an authoritarian you are in relation to authoritarian right. So yeah, fascism, Nazism, anything that is in that particular tradition. So I've taken it before. I have never scored anywhere near close to being a fascist, but I figured I'd just take it for fun, just for the sake of making a quick video. So we'll get started right now, and I'll explain a couple of the questions if there is even a need to. So this video is not edited, I just wanted to do a quick upload before work today. So I will also have a more long-form video essay up later in the day, most likely by this evening as of the date of this recording. So on that note, we'll take the fascism test. There are no universal ethics. What is true and good for one people may be false and bad for another. So what I would say is that there are certain things that are universally seen as quote-unquote good and bad, like murder or rape or theft, that sort of thing. However, I'd say that each different culture has their own interpretation of what that is specifically. So I know essentially what they're asking, but I'm going to go with neutral here because this is more of a nuanced question. So the economic losses from the worker strikes and employer lockouts are just too massive to allow market forces to sort these things out by themselves. Though I will disagree as somebody who is a liberal on economics. This could go either way with regards to fascism or communism. They're pretty much just two sides of the same coin. Not to sound like an enlightened horseshoe centrist, but that's more or less true. Next question. Warfare is the only state that truly shows you what a given people is made of. So, while war is an inevitability, it is a part of human nature, it's a part of existence, that's a sad truth, I don't believe that it is really the only way or even the best way to show what a people or a nation, their grit or what they're made of. I think maybe you could argue that that's one of the things. However, I think there are more important things like art, ingenuity, engineering, exploration, those sort of things. So I'm going to go with the disagree here. The individual is more important than the state. Of course, 100% agree. I'm the complete opposite of a fascist when it comes to that particular idea. So the political challenges of today are so serious that they can no longer be solved within the traditional paradigms of political thought. I think that is more or less a given because of the particular age or stage of political morphology that we live in, specifically in the West and even more specifically in the United States. So I'm going to go with agree. Democracy is dangerous to competent statecraft because it forces political decision to be lowered to a level of stupidity that the masses can understand. So yeah, practically speaking. However, I think democracy in healthy doses is a good way to keep the government accountable, so I'm going to stay neutral on this one. Classical liberalism is essentially an ideology of the past, and modern attempts to reinstate, aka neoliberalism, are bound to lead wars. So as somebody who subscribes more or less to this ideology, but it doesn't necessarily embrace the label anymore, I'm going to go with disagree. Plurality of political parties is necessary to ensure that no one circle of individuals gets too complacent in power. 100% agree. I think that is one of the biggest problems with the United States today. The mode of organization employed by the military is an efficient one, and institutions like schools, police, and firefighters could generally benefit from adopting more of the military's practices and discipline. So while I do think that they are more structured and disciplined, referring to the military, and that does lead to increased efficiency, I don't believe that that is conducive to things like educational institutions specifically. So I'm going to go with disagree. People who seek happiness through money and material comfort will never achieve it. Yeah, I can agree with that. I'm not a huge fan of materialism. I understand that there's basically a threshold of maximum utility when it comes to that sort of thing. I think it was like no one who makes above like $200,000, like that's money makes you happier, but once you get to $200,000, it doesn't make you any happier than that. I forget where I saw that, but I believe that actually was like more or less an empirical statistic. Maybe it's more of a truism. I don't know. Running a business is not very hard, and as a rule, the business owner doesn't possess any special skills that are not also possessed by his workers. Strongly disagree with that. Everybody has their own talents, everyone has their own abilities, and everyone working and honing their own abilities, especially in the market, is ultimately one of the modes of success. It definitely strengthens the society, strengthens the economy, strengthens the culture, pretty much everything like that. So, yeah. When it comes down to it, politics is mostly about the distribution of money, materials, and resources. People's values and religions are just icing on the cake. Strongly disagree. I think culture is just as important as politics. In fact, I think politics are actually a reflection of the culture. For instance, I think that liberalism is inherently Western. I don't think it could have arisen anywhere else. Yeah, democracy itself arose naturally in ancient India around the same time as it did in ancient Athens, but there were two completely different kinds of democracy. And today, India is a different kind of democracy than Western liberal democracies are. So even though they're similar, they're predicated on completely different ethoses and values and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I think that people's values and worldviews definitely affect the political systems that they ultimately create. Oh, I went back. So yeah, I strongly disagree. If a state is to protect the freedom of its citizens in the long run, the state itself must be free to make controversial or unlawful decisions when necessary. I generally disagree. I understand that like doing that sort of thing maximizes efficiency in some regards, and maybe you can occasionally make a utilitarian argument in favor of this. However, that would only be in the most drastic of situations. But I'm going to say disagree because that should not be like a prime value of the government. It should be like maybe a last resort if there is to be a government at all. I'm not an ANCAP, like I said in my last video when I took the political compass, but I mean, I kind of like the voluntarist idea, but in terms of my values and my principles, I would disagree with this. Few consumer goods and an increase in living standards as an end to themselves is a sign of moral corruption and decadence. So I don't really like this question because I feel like it reduces fascism to being anti-materialism. I think that you can be any ideology and be anti-materialist to an extent. But in a lot of ways, fascists actually were materialists. That's how they're very similar to like communists and Marxists. And in fact, many fascists in history actually were former Marxists and communists, socialists, syndicalists, all that sort of thing. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm going to put disagree because I think it's relative to each individual people, and some material goods and increasing in living standards can at least maximize happiness, but might not make people entirely happy. So again, I will go with disagree here. In the end, economic and technological strength cannot compete with the spiritual strength of a people that has faith in their community. Again, this is another reductive question, and I think it assumes that this is like a prime ideal of fascism, which, I mean, it could be, but it expresses itself differently in each culture. So I will go with agree. Politicians have a responsibility not to upset the traditional ways of communities that live according to their time-honored customs, values, and creeds. I mean, life has changed. I mean, I think it's important in the Burkean sense to preserve traditions while also focusing on reforming or restructuring certain ideals and traditions that might be outmoded. However, there still are certain values, fundamental values to the society that are important for it to function in the first place. So here, generally, I'm going to say disagree because life is change, but it's still good to respect the foundational pillars of the society. So All people are necessarily worth the same, no matter their race, gender, nationality, or IQ. Yeah, I'd agree with that. The free market is the most efficient way of organizing the economy known to man. Well, it has its problems, definitely, like all systems, um, but yeah, it is the best system we have, and I think we should maintain that system, maybe restructure it somehow, get rid of some crony capitalism and regulations, that sort of thing. But generally, like 90% of the time, this is true, maybe even 100% of the time. I don't know. I think there is a little bit of nuance, but this question is pretty straightforward, and I would agree with that. So, if a people hasn't accomplished much throughout the course of its history, that tells you something about the worth of a people. Not necessarily, because I think geography has a lot to do with it, and also whether or not they were conquered at some point in the early stages. I think that's pretty much random, more or less. I mean, I'm kind of a Spenglerian when it comes to my view of culture, with some hints of Arnold Toynbee, but the stage of cultural development is semi-deterministic, semi-perennialist, but so generally if the culture lives its natural life, it'll die eventually. However, I think like a culture can be killed before it's able to be matured, kind of like the Aztecs in a sense, or the Native Americans in North America, who didn't even they weren't even given an opportunity to build a civilization. They were still in like an early pre-culture phase. But yeah, no, I think when it comes to this is more random, because I think all cultures, no culture is like dimmer than the other. They all have their own ways of understanding the world, their own cosmology, their own mathematics, their own science, all that sort of thing. I don't think it has to do with any culture being superior or not. So I'm going to say strongly disagree. Ethics matter in statecraft. Whatever furthers the interest of the state is good. Whatever inhibits it, bad. This question's worded strangely. This is a matter of statecraft. Oh, no. Definitely no. The state is not the most important thing, and that is a fundamental fascist principle. So yeah, no, definitely not. The struggle between rich and poor, between capital owners and laborers, is a more significant driver in history than the struggle between nations. I mean, I think people are more divided along the lines of nationality, or rather, in a larger sense, civilization, than they are by class, because you might have like a working class person in Wuhan, China, and then somebody who works on a Kenyan farm, and then you have somebody who's like a Colombian coffee bean planter, or at least a worker, somebody working in the fields in a plantation for the planter. I don't think those three people would have anything in common. I think the concept of communism is rather dumb, because it presupposes that the entire working class, the global working class, they all have things in common. But it's a very flimsy premise, like I said. Those people, the only thing they have in common is that they all happen to be what those respective civilizations would consider to be quote-unquote wage workers. But the conditions are completely different, and they are more likely to identify with their own people, culturally speaking, than they are to just on the basis of the kind of work that they do, especially work that's barely even vaguely similar. So yeah, I disagree with that. I guess I kind of subscribe to Huntington's Clash of Civilizations theory. So organizations like the Freemasons and similar lodges cannot be trusted, since they have their own agendas. So strongly disagree for reasons that I really don't want to go into right now. Maybe I'll reveal it later, but I don't think it's important. So, a person who has nothing to hide has nothing to fear from government surveillance. Strongly disagree. 100%. Politically speaking, the state is a second-order consequence, the derived effect of a people laying claim to their homelands and flourishing there. Yeah, I mean, I think the evolution of the state is natural, kind of like what Herbert Spencer wrote about. I don't think that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's just a thing. And while I don't like the idea of government and am philosophically a voluntarist, I guess pragmatically, I'm more like Robert Nozick, who talked about the inevitability of the state, and that even the most logical extents to which liberty can exist would be in a night watchman state, because in anarchy, what is there to stop a state from rising in the first place? I mean, it always happens. The state, according to Weber, is whichever institution in a society has the monopoly on violence, which could even be some kind of corporation or some kind of commune that rises and gets followers and stuff and conquer that, then you're basically back to square one. So yeah, state is definitely natural, unfortunately. The honor and worth of a people is proportional with the contributions it has made to global civilization. If a people has not contributed much, it's of little worth. There's no such thing as global civilization. That is a very Eurocentric idea, and it rests on the assumption that the Western values are universal and have spread around the world and spread modernization and industry. It's just a very Promethean hubris. Just as Prometheus gave fire unto man, the West more or less thinks or believes that, well, it's technically true, but took technology and gave it unto the rest of the world. I think every culture has their own contributions they made. Like the Middle East, they produced the Abrahamic religions, which have been very possibly the most important, or they encompass the most important set of ideals as it relates to the development of things like science and art, and that sort of thing, at least in terms of the Western European American culture and the sort of Judeo-Christian Islamic Magian culture of the Middle East. So I'm going to strongly disagree with that, mostly also because global civilization is a myth. So maybe it won't be one day, maybe it'll happen, but for now it remains a myth. People shouldn't be allowed to spread dangerous political beliefs or ridicule those with whom they disagree without permission of proper authorities. I am for free speech, 100%. That's probably within my top 5 most important issues, and I think, especially after reading John Stuart Mill's On Liberty in High School, which is the most important book with regards to the development of my own political philosophy. So, yeah, no, even if it's a dangerous thing like communism, I think people should be allowed to spread it. However, there's the sort of, I don't like this phrase because it's gotten cringe, but the marketplace of ideas or whatever. So yeah, and I think that socialism, communism, and fascism at this point are sterile ideologies that have no future, and they're not going to cause much of a problem. However, you can also make the argument that James Burnham made that talks about how the paradox of democracy is that either you let everybody with these different beliefs and value systems participate, and then that will end up including people who disagree with democracy and don't like democracy, which will ultimately possibly end up stifling democracy and destroying it, or you can exclude those people from participating in democracy, and thereby in doing so, democracy is betraying its own principles. But as somebody who philosophically believes in free speech, free expression, First Amendment, is against stuff like quote-unquote cancel culture, both when the right and the left cancel each other. Somebody who thinks the concept of hate speech is stupid, even though I think people who espouse what is often referred to as quote-unquote hate speech, I think generally they tend to be vile people. So yeah, I'm going to strongly disagree with that on principle. The individual cannot really claim any rights against the state, since it is the state that grants them these rights in the first place. No, rights are natural, unless you consider things like voting or like health care or those sort of things, which aren't even which are not even rights by definition, because by definition, rights are natural, and that's something I wish people like Bernie Sanders would understand. So, I agree with this. Or disagree, I mean. Whew, I almost did agree. It's not logical or efficient to have several companies all making the same tire, the same wrench, the same cable, so the state should step in to coordinate their efforts. 100% disagree. That's collectivization. That's socialism. or in the case of fascism, it's socialism by proxy. So yeah, let's finish now. Let's see where I am. Okay, so I am 31% fascist, which makes you not a fascist. But again, I think the problem with this test is that some of the questions are black and white and vague, and doesn't really leave room for certain rationalizations, because people will believe certain things for different things. And because I'm a realist, I think in some regards the test will assume that when I agree with something, that they are things that I actually agree with philosophically or morally, when it's more of like when I more have a Hobbesian Machiavellian view on human nature. And I think we should do our best to make sure that those realities of nature at a basic level are sort of thwarted for the good of civilization, for the good of the common good, for humanity in general. So yeah, I'd say this test is a little lopsided and doesn't take that into consideration. But I'm still not fascist, and I was not expecting to be anywhere near fascist. So yeah, I'm 31% fascist, which makes me not a fascist. While your political outlook may share a few, or even quite a few, of fascism's fundamental doctrines, it is overall safe to say that your political orientation is not a fascist one. Now, you may find this result unsurprising, but in reality most people have at least some points of agreement with fascism, since fascism is really a mix of communism, socialism, conservatism, and liberalism. That's a good way of explaining it. So yeah, with even a few innovations of its own thrown in, definitely right. Hence, adjusting for these factors, even though your fascism percentage might seem quite high, there is really nothing surprising about these agreements when viewed in their proper historical context, so rest assured, your political beliefs are definitely not fascist. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's good to know. That makes sense. At least they're explaining it now. Now, I'm going to take the F-scale test and see what the difference is. So, actually, no, I will take this another time. I do not have time at the moment. I need to work on the rest of the video, and then I have a full day ahead of me. So we will save this for later. We will do a sequel episode. So on that note, this is the Politicrat. Please like, subscribe, click that little bell, whatever it does, but I hear it helps. And I will see you in the next video. Farewell.